Watch 12:20. The morning sun rises over Samarkand, illuminating one of the world's greatest cities, home to nearly 250,000 souls. This jewel of the Silk Road gleams with turquoise, domes and bustling bazaars where merchants from China trade with caravans from Europe. The aqueducts flow with crystal water from distant mountains, feeding the lush gardens that make this desert paradise possible. But today, something is different. A strange sound echoes from beyond the city walls. Not thunder, not wind. The rhythmic pounding of thousands upon thousands of hooves grows louder with each passing moment. On the ramparts, sentries squint into the morning haze and see something that turns their blood to ice. An army is approaching from the Kizilkum Desert, emerging from a wasteland that everyone knew was impossible to cross. Banners bearing strange symbols ripple in the wind. The dust cloud behind them suggests a force so massive it defies comprehension. Within 7 days, this magnificent city would be reduced to smoking ruins, its streets running red with blood. The question that haunted everyone who watched that army approach was simple and terrifying. How do you fight an enemy that does the impossible? This is the story of how Genghis Khan crushed the Persian Empire. But before we witness the carnage, we need to understand how the most powerful empire in Central Asia managed to provoke the wrath of history's most feared conqueror. And trust me, what you're about to hear is a masterclass in how not to conduct diplomacy. Everything seemed perfect for Shah Muhammad II of Khwarazm. His empire stretched from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf, encompassing the richest trade routes in the world. With an estimated 5 million subjects, he ruled over legendary cities like Bukhara, Hat, and Samarkand. He had just finished crushing his rivals, the Ghurids, and even the mighty Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad had to acknowledge his power. Muhammad wasn't just confident, he was cocky. So when a Mongol trade caravan arrived at the border city of Otrar carrying jade, ivory, gold, and white camel hair cloaks as gifts from Genghis Khan, the Shah's uncle and governor Inalchuk made a decision that would echo through history. He accused the merchants of being spies. Then he had them executed and seized all their goods. Now, let me be clear about something. In the medieval world, killing merchants was bad. Killing merchants from a powerful neighbor was really bad. But what came next was absolutely catastrophic. Genghis Khan, trying to maintain diplomacy, sent 3 envoys to give the Shah a chance to make things right. Hand over the governor, punish him for his crime, and maybe everyone could move on. The Shah's response: he executed one of the envoys, possibly all 3, depending on which source you believe, and sent their bodies back to Mongolia. You have to understand what this means. In the nomadic world, envoys were sacred. Killing an ambassador wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration that civilized rules no longer applied. And here's the thing that drives me crazy about this whole situation. We don't even know if Muhammad wanted war or was just incredibly stupid. Some historians think he was trying to pick a fight, believing the Mongols were just another steppe tribe he could easily crush. Others suggest he simply had no idea what kind of apocalypse he was inviting upon his empire. Either way, Genghis Khan's response was swift and merciless. He assembled a force estimated between 100,000 and 150,000 warriors and crossed the Jaxartes River in 1219. But here's what made this invasion different from every other nomadic raid in history. He brought along an entire corps of Chinese siege engineers complete with the most advanced military technology of the age. The Khwarazmians were about to learn that these weren't just horse archers. They were bringing gunpowder, advanced catapults, and centuries of Chinese expertise in breaking down city walls. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most brutal campaigns, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started, and what happens next makes Game of Thrones look like a children's story. Before we get to Samarkand, we need to understand who Genghis Khan really was, because Hollywood has done him a massive disservice. Yes, he was brutal. Yes, his campaigns killed millions. But calling him just a barbarian warlord is like calling Einstein some guy who was good at math. What made Genghis truly terrifying wasn't his savagery, it was his intelligence. The Mongol military was organized with a precision that wouldn't be matched. In Europe for another 500 years, every unit was based on the decimal system. Squads of 10, companies of 100, battalions of 1,000, and divisions of 10,000, called two men's soldiers, weren't grouped by tribe or family, but by merit and function. If fra you were talented, you could rise from nothing to command thousands. This meritocracy created a military machine where loyalty went to competence, not bloodline. But here's where Genghis showed his true genius. He learned from everyone he conquered. After struggling against the walled cities of northern China since 1211, he didn't just retreat. He recruited Chinese engineers, studied their siege techniques, and adopted their technology. His army carried traction catapults that could hurl 100 stones with pinpoint accuracy. One chronicler wrote that these mangonel men could convert the eye of a needle into a passage for a camel with their precision. They had flamethrowers using naphtha, early grenades filled with gunpowder, and the ho chong, a Chinese mortar that was basically a primitive cannon. And this is what I love about military history. Technology alone never wins wars. It's how you use it. The Mongols combined these siege weapons with psychological warfare that was centuries ahead of its time. They didn't just attack cities, they terrorized them. And in February 1220, they gave Samarkand a preview of what was coming when they attacked Bukhara. Bukhara was no ordinary city, home to 300,000 people. It was known as the Dome of Islam in the East, a center of learning and culture that rivaled Baghdad itself. When the Mongols approached from the supposedly impassable Kiselkum Desert, the city was stunned. They had expected the Mongols to attack from the east along normal caravan routes, not to materialize like ghosts from a wasteland. The garrison made its fatal mistake on the second day. Thinking they could break the siege with a sortie, they charged out of the gates with their cavalry. The Mongols did what they did best. They pretended to retreat. The Khwarazmian cavalry, smelling victory, pursued them farther and farther from the city walls. Then the Mongols turned and surrounded them. It was a slaughter. The survivors limped back to find their city's lower town had already surrendered. The citadel held out for 12 days before the Mongols breached the walls. What happened next set the tone for the entire campaign. Every single person who had taken refuge in the citadel was executed. Every single one. The Mongols then separated the survivors. Artisans were sent to Mongolia, where their skills would be useful. Young men were conscripted into the Mongol army to serve as cannon fodder in future sieges, and everyone else was divided among the soldiers as slaves. Then they looted the city, and, according to chroniclers, a fire broke out that reduced most of Bukhara to ashes. One account describes Genghis Khan gathering the wealthy citizens in Bukhara's great mosque and delivering perhaps the most chilling speech in history. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Whether he actually said this or whether it was added later by Persian chroniclers trying to make sense of the catastrophe, it captured something essential about how the Mongols saw themselves as forces of nature. Unstoppable and inevitable, news of Bukhar's fate spread like wildfire. And here's the crucial detail that Samarkand's defenders couldn't ignore. The Mongols had taken 30,000 survivors from Bukhara and forced them to march with the army. These prisoners weren't just porters. They would be the human shields in the next siege, driven forward to absorb arrows and crossbow bolts while the Mongol engineers set up their devastating siege weapons. As reports reached Samarkand about columns of Mongol cavalry and thousands of terrified prisoners marching west, the city's fate seemed sealed. But Shah Muhammad the coup was about to make a series of decisions that military historians still argue about today. Decisions so catastrophically bad that they've become textbook examples of how not to defend an empire. Let me paint you a picture of what Samarkand represented in 1220. Imagine combining the economic power of New York, the cultural prestige of Paris, and the defensive capability of a fortress, and you're getting close. The city sat astride the Zaravan River, its massive walls, protecting a population estimated between 200,000 and 300,000 souls. These weren't mud brick defenses. These were serious fortifications that had turned back armies for centuries. Inside those walls, Shah Muhammad had concentrated a garrison that should have been able to hold off any siege. Modern estimates vary wildly, from as few as 20,000 to as many as 40,000 trained soldiers, plus tens of thousands more militia and armed citizens. But here's what made Samarkand's defenders truly formidable. They had 20 war elephants, armored behemoths that had terrorized battlefields from India to Persia for over 1,000 years. These weren't just animals. They were walking tanks equipped with armor, plating and carrying warriors on their backs who could rain arrows down on any attacker. The garrison also included elite Turo-Iranian heavy cavalry, some of the finest horsemen in the world, and enough provisions to withstand a siege for months. On paper, Samarkand was impregnable. This should have been where the Mongol advance ground to a halt. So, what went wrong? Shah Muhammad II made 3 catastrophic mistakes. And I need you to understand these because they're masterclasses in how ego and fear can destroy empires. First, instead of concentrating his forces into one massive army that could meet the Mongols in the field, he scattered them. He garrisoned Samarkand, Balkh, Attar, and a dozen other cities, dividing his strength so completely that no single force could stand against the Mongol Tumans. His reasoning: he thought the Mongols were just conducting a typical nomadic raid. They'd ravage the countryside, maybe besiege 1 or 2 cities, then go home when winter came. He had no conception that he was facing an enemy that had spent 9 years perfecting the art of breaking fortified cities in northern China. Second, he created a power vacuum that paralyzed decision-making. Muhammad didn't trust his commanders. The only person he truly believed in was his eldest son, Jalal ad-Din, who was stationed elsewhere. Meanwhile, his mother, Turkin Khatun, wielded so much power that she had her own government office and palace, and every one of Muhammad's orders had to be countersigned by her. Historians described their relationship as an uneasy diary. They constantly fought for control, and this internal power struggle meant that when the Mongols struck, there was no unified command structure to coordinate a defense. Third, and this is the one that still makes me angry when I read about it, he underestimated his enemy. Muhammad had heard about the Mongols. Of course, he knew they were good at raiding, but he'd only ever fought nomads like the Kangli, who had no knowledge of siege warfare whatsoever. The idea that these steppe warriors would bring an entire corps of Chinese engineers, complete with cutting-edge siege technology and potentially early gunpowder weapons, never entered his calculations. When scouts reported that the Mongols were building catapults and siege towers, the Khwarazmian commanders were genuinely shocked. But there's another factor that doesn't get talked about enough: internal divisions. A significant portion of Samarkand's garrison was Turk, recruited from the same steppe peoples as the Mongols themselves. Their loyalty to the Persian Shah was questionable at best. According to the chronicler Ibn Alath, when the Mongols arrived, some Turkish soldiers allegedly said, "We are their race. Why should we fight them?" This ethnic and cultural fracture would prove fatal. By early March 1220, as the Mongols approached from both banks of the Zarishan River, Samarkand's defenders watched their doom approaching with growing dread. Genghis Khan's sons, Ogedei and Chagatai, had finished reducing Attar and joined their father with fresh troops. The Mongol force now numbered in the hundreds of thousands when you included all their auxiliaries and the conscripted prisoners from previous victories. And here's where the Mongols demonstrated their mastery of psychological warfare. At the head of their columns marched 30,000 prisoners from Bukhara carrying Mongol banners and wearing pieces of Mongol armor. From Samarkand's walls, it looked like the Mongol army was twice its actual size. Worse, the defenders could see the survivors of Bukhara, people they might have known being driven forward as human cattle. The message was clear: this is what happens to those who resist. Drop a comment below. If you were commanding Samarkand's defense, would you have tried to hold the city or attempted a breakout? Because what the defenders chose to do next would seal their fate. The siege began on a spring morning when Mongol cavalry completed the encirclement of Samarkand. Unlike typical steppe armies that would probe for weaknesses and then ride off, these warriors dismounted and began the methodical work of siege warfare. Within hours, Chinese engineers were surveying the walls, calculating angles and measuring distances. By nightfall, the first siege engines were under construction. Now, I want you to understand what medieval siege warfare really meant, because movies always get this wrong. This wasn't about dramatic battles and heroic charges. It was about grinding, relentless terror. On the first day, the Mongols positioned their traction catapults at calculated intervals around the city. These weren't crude machines. They were precision. Instruments powered by teams of men, pulling synchronized ropes capable of hurling stones weighing up to 100 pounds with devastating accuracy. The bombardment began at dawn on the second day and didn't stop. Not for meals, not for sleep, not ever. Hour after hour, day and night, stones whistled through the air and smashed into Samarkand's walls. But the Mongols weren't just using rocks. They had naphtha bombs, burning packages of oil and sulfur that exploded on impact and set buildings ablaze. They had incendiary arrows that could reach deep into the city. And according to some sources, they had ho chong, primitive gunpowder mortars that produced tremendous noise and fire, even if they weren't as destructive as later firearms would be. One chronicler recorded that the Mongol engineers could target specific sections of the wall with such precision that defenders couldn't repair the damage faster than it accumulated. Imagine being a soldier on those walls, watching cracks spider across stone that had stood for centuries, knowing that every hour brought collapse closer. Now add the fact that you can't sleep because the bombardment never stops. The psychological impact was devastating. Inside the city, panic was spreading. Refugees from Bukhara were telling stories of what the Mongols did to those who surrendered, let alone those who resisted. Food was plentiful for now, but water was becoming a concern because some of the aqueducts had been cut. Worse, everyone could see the prisoners from the Bukhara camped in the front ranks of the Mongol army, knowing that they would be driven forward when the assault came. On the third day, Samarkand's commanders made their move. They would sortie in force, break through the Mongol lines, and either scatter the besiegers or at least create enough chaos to slow down the siege. It was a desperate gamble, but it might have worked if they'd been facing a normal enemy. They weren't. The gates opened at dawn. First came the war elephants, 20 armored giants that trumpeted their challenge as they charged toward the Mongol lines. Behind them thundered thousands of heavy cavalry, the elite Turco-Iranian horsemen who had never known defeat. It must have been a magnificent sight, a final desperate throw of the dice by an empire that refused to die quietly. The Mongols did exactly what they'd done at Bukhara, what they'd done in 100 battles across Asia. They retreated, or seemed to. Their light cavalry fell back before the elephants, loosing arrows as they went, but making no effort to stand and fight. To the Khwarazmians, it looked like victory. Their elephants were driving the Mongol cavalry before them. They pushed farther from the walls, farther from safety, committing more and more troops to the pursuit. That's when the trap closed. Mongol heavy cavalry that had been concealed in dead ground to the flanks suddenly appeared. The retreating light cavalry wheeled around with practiced precision. In an instant, the Khwarazmians found themselves surrounded with Mongol archers, on all sides pouring arrows into their ranks from ranges where return fire was impossible. The war elephants, those magnificent beasts that were supposed to be invincible, became liabilities. Panicked by the arrows and unable to reach their tormentors, some went berserk and trampled their own side. Within an hour, the sortie had turned into a catastrophe. Those who made it back to the gates were the lucky ones. The Mongols allowed them to retreat, knowing that the sight of thousands of broken soldiers stumbling back into the city would do more damage to morale than killing them all would. The elephants that survived were captured. According to sources, Genghis Khan later released them into the countryside where they died of starvation because they couldn't find enough food. Even in this detail, there's a casual cruelty that's hard to comprehend. After the failed sortie, something broke in Samarkand. The next day, a large portion of the garrison opened the gates and surrendered, hoping for mercy. They received none. Every single one of them was executed in full view of the city walls. The message was brutal and clear. Surrender means death. Resist and die. Those are your only options. Now here's where the ethnic divisions I mentioned earlier became critical. The Turk soldiers in the garrison, seeing their Persian comrades being slaughtered and hearing Mongol officers shouting offers of clemency in their own language, began to waver. Some sources suggest that Genghis Khan spies had been spreading rumors that the Shah's mother, Turkin Khatun, had secretly allied with the Mongols, exploiting the known tensions in Khwarazmian leadership. Whether this was true or not didn't matter. What mattered was that trust inside the city was collapsing. Only the inner citadel continued to resist. A hard core of loyalists who knew they had nothing to lose. For one more month, they held out behind the strongest walls, launching desperate counterattacks and repairing damage as fast as they could. But siege warfare is mathematics, not heroism. Every day, the Mongol bombardment widened the breaches. Every night, sappers dug tunnels to undermine the foundations. It was only a matter of time. A small force did manage to cut their way through the Mongol lines one night and escape across the Amudarya River, probably with help from sympathetic Turkish soldiers on the siege line. But for the rest, there was no escape. When the citadel finally fell, the Mongols poured in for the final reckoning. On March 19, 1220, Samarkand, jewel of the Silk Road, pearl of Central Asia, fell silent. What happened after the walls fell is difficult to write. About even 800 years later, the chronicler Juveni recorded that Genghis Khan ordered that everyone who had taken refuge in the citadel and the great mosque be killed. Not imprisoned, not enslaved, killed. The streets ran with blood, and the screams of the dying filled the spring air. This was the price of resistance. But the Mongols weren't just mindless destroyers. They were practical. From the surviving population, they separated out 30,000 young men of fighting age and conscripted them into the Mongol army. These men would be used in future sieges exactly as the Bukhara. Prisoners had been used here, driven forward as human shields, expendable cannon fodder to absorb the defender arrows and crossbow bolts. Another 30,000 were identified as craftsmen and skilled artisans. These were valuable. They were bound and sent east to Mongolia, where they would spend the rest of their lives producing weapons, armor, and luxury goods for their conquerors. Everyone else, the old, the women, the children, the unskilled laborers, they were distributed among the Mongol soldiers as slaves. Some sources suggest the total death toll in Samarkand alone reached into the hundreds of thousands. Though these medieval numbers are notoriously unreliable, what we know for certain is that a city of 250,000 people was left as smoking, depopulated ruin. The Mongols then systematically looted everything of value. Gold, silver, jewels, fine textiles, anything that could be carried was taken. What couldn't be carried was often destroyed. Though whether the famous fires that consumed much of the city were deliberately set or accidental results of the fighting remains debated. And where was Shah Muhammad II during all this running? When Samarkand fell, he was already fleeing westward with a small group of loyal soldiers, abandoning his empire to save his own skin. Genghis Khan dispatched two of his greatest generals, Subutai and Jebe, with orders to hunt the Shah down. These two would lead one of the most remarkable pursuits in military history, chasing Muhammad across Persia and into the Caucasus. The Shah fled from city to city, always staying one step ahead of his pursuers, never stopping long enough to rally his forces or organize a defense. He had once ruled an empire, from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf. Now he was a fugitive king with nowhere to hide. By late 1220, sick and exhausted, he reached a small island in the Caspian Sea near the port of Abaskan. It was there in December that he died. The official cause of death was pleurisy, a lung infection, but some chroniclers suggested he died of shock and grief at the loss of his empire. Think about that. In less than 2 years, Muhammad went from being one of the most powerful rulers in the world to dying alone on a windswept island. His empire in ruins, his cities burning, his people scattered. Whether he died of disease or a broken heart, the result was the same. The Khwarazmian Empire died with him, but Genghis Khan wasn't finished. After Samarkand fell, he divided his forces and launched a campaign of systematic destruction across Coruscant that defies imagination. His youngest son, Tolui, was given the task of reducing the great cities of eastern Persia. Herat, Nishapur, and Mv, three of the largest and most prosperous cities in the world at that time, were each besieged and destroyed in turn. The siege of Nishapur is particularly horrifying. The city had held out against earlier Mongol attacks and killed one of Genghis Khan's favorite sons-in-law. When it finally fell, Tolui ordered every living thing in the city killed. Men, women, children, even cats and dogs. The chronicler Ibn Alath, writing shortly after, claimed that each Mongol soldier was assigned between 300 and 400 people to execute. While this number is almost certainly exaggerated, the contemporary historian Atta Malik Juveni recorded that a cleric spent 13 days counting corpses and arrived at a figure of 1.3 million dead. Even accounting for medieval inflation of numbers, the scale of killing was genocidal. What drives me crazy about studying this period is how completely the Mongols broke the conventional wisdom about warfare. In 1219, the Khwarazmian Empire was at its peak, wealthy beyond measure, with powerful armies and fortified cities that had never fallen to steppe nomads. 2 years later, it ceased to exist. Not weakened, not diminished, erased. And the scary part, this was just the beginning. Genghis Khan's empire would go on to become the largest contiguous land empire in history, twice the size of the Roman Empire at its peak. So what do we learn from this catastrophe? Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about why it happened and what we can learn from it. First, technology matters, but organization matters more. The Khwarazmians had brave soldiers, strong walls, and war elephants. The Mongols had catapults, Chinese engineers, and possibly early gunpowder weapons. But the real difference was organizational. The Mongol army operated with a unity of command and purpose that the divided Khwarazmian forces could never match. When Shah Muhammad scattered his armies across a dozen cities, he doomed them all. The Mongols could concentrate overwhelming force against each target in turn, while the scattered Khwarazmian garrisons could never support each other. Second, intelligence and psychological warfare can be as important as physical weapons. The Mongols didn't just attack cities, they terrorized them. They spread rumors, exploited ethnic and political divisions, and used the survivors of previous sieges as both human shields and walking advertisements of what happened to those who resisted. By the time they reached each new city, half the psychological battle was already won. Third, and this is the one that really sticks with me, underestimating your enemy is fatal. Shah Muhammad thought he was dealing with typical steppe raiders who would go away after grabbing some loot. He had no concept that Genghis Khan had studied Chinese siege warfare for 9 years and brought that expertise to Central Asia. His failure to understand his opponent cost him everything. But here's what's truly fascinating about Samarkand's story. It didn't end in 1220. The city was rebuilt, and in 1370, it became the capital of another great conqueror, Timur, also known as Tamerlane. Ironically, Timur claimed descent from Genghis Khan and used many of the same military tactics. Under his rule, Samarkand became perhaps even more magnificent than it had been before the Mongols destroyed it. The stunning architecture that tourists visit today, the Registun Square and the Bibim Mosque, were built by Timur in the late 14th century. This brings up an uncomfortable question that historians still debate. Did the Mongol conquests, for all their brutality, actually benefit the world in the long run? They destroyed countless cities and killed millions. True, but they also created the largest free trade zone in history, spreading technology, ideas, and goods from China to Europe. Gunpowder, printing, and paper money all spread westward along Mongol trade routes. The Pax Mongolica, the period of Mongol peace, made the Silk Road safer than it had been in centuries. I'm not saying the ends justified the means. The suffering was real, the death toll was staggering, and entire civilizations were wiped out. But I am saying that history is complicated, and the same empire that massacred some also created conditions that would eventually lead to the Renaissance in Europe and the spread of technologies that changed the world. For the people of Samarkand in March 1220, though these future benefits meant nothing, they experienced one of the worst atrocities in human history, a 7-day nightmare that left their city in ruins and their civilization in ashes. The estimated death toll from the entire Mongol invasion of the Khwarazmian Empire runs into the millions, with some scholars suggesting that the population of Central Asia didn't recover to pre-invasion levels for over a century. One final thought that haunts me about this story. It all started because a governor in a Tatar killed some merchants and a Shah made the catastrophic decision to execute diplomatic envoys. Two small decisions by arrogant men who thought they were untouchable led to the complete destruction of one of the world's great empires. It's a reminder that in international relations, in war, in leadership, small decisions can have world-shattering consequences. The ruins of Samarkand in March 1220 stood as a testament to what happens when empires grow complacent, when leaders underestimate their enemies, and when the old rules of warfare meet something entirely new. Genghis Khan's conquest of Central Asia was a turning point in world history. The moment when it became clear that the age of isolated civilizations was ending and a new, more connected and more dangerous world was being born. If this deep dive into medieval warfare and the fall of empires has captured your imagination, I need you to do 3 things. First, smash that subscribe button because we're going to be exploring more of history's most brutal and fascinating conflicts. Second, hit the like button if you want to see more content like this. And third, drop a comment telling me what historical battle or siege should I cover next. The siege of Constantinople, the Mongol invasion of Japan, the fall of Baghdad. Your suggestions literally shape what we create next. Remember, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And if there's one lesson from Samarkand, it's this. Never underestimate your enemy. Never divide your forces in the face of a unified threat. And never ever kill the ambassador.